Okay, we are going to create our own color wheel in Photoshop. So you need to start by making a new document. So in Photoshop, I've just done a Command N, and in the resulting option, I'm going to choose just the default Photoshop size, but I'm going to do a few tweaks over here in the right-hand panel. We're going to, on the background content, we're normally used to seeing a white background canvas, if you will, but we're going to click on this option and we're going to choose transparent. And this will make sense when we work through this. Click OK or create. And this checkerboard pattern that we see instead of a white document is Photoshop's way of indicating transparency. There's nothing there, we can see through it. It's going to be useful for this demonstration of doing the color wheel, but it's actually going to be kind of give your eyes a workout. So if you don't want to actually look at this crazy checkerboard, but you do want it to still behave as transparency, we can actually turn off this this tic-tac-toe board, if you will. So in our preferences, so under File on a PC and under Preferences, under the Photoshop drop-down on a Mac, we're going to choose Preferences and then Transparency and Gamut. And when this pops up, we're going to choose None for our grid size. So right now our grid is medium, our checkerboard. We're going to choose None. So it's going to look like a regular white background like we're used to seeing, but in fact, if we look over at our layers panel, it still is transparent. This is important for just this exercise that we're working through because we're going to shine light through something and we need it to be transparent. We have to remember to turn this feature off when we move on in the book, and I will remind you of that. So for now, we are in a transparent background, but we've turned off the view of it. All right, we are going to create circles filled with our additive colors. So we're going to get our shape tools. They are located above the hand tool. So depending on what shape you've used recently, we want the ellipse tool. And before we move on, we have to look at our option bar up above here. In the mode, we want to make sure that we're making a shape, not a path or pixels. So we should have this be shape. And in our fill swatch, we're going to click on it, and then we want this color picker. So we're going to click on this little rainbow thing over here on the right. That's going to bring up our color picker. So again, here are our colors all the way around the edge of the color wheel, from reds, yellows, or oranges, yellows, greens, whatever. And we're going to see that we also have our brightness going from bright down to dark. And we also have our tints and shades. So adding white little by little, we get a pink, a darker pink, a light red, and then all the way over our full saturation of red over here. If we look at our naming versions, we have 4 ways of naming color. And I'm just going to click on a random color here to show you. The first way is HSB, hue, saturation, brightness. The second way is the RGB numbers. So if you want this color to show up on a device using light, like a computer or a phone, you would use this much red, this much green, this much blue, or a hex code. That's a code that we use when we're writing HTML on web pages. If you wanted to use this in print, you would use 24% cyan, 93% magenta, 86 yellow, and 17K, the black or registration. And a final way of measuring is lab, which is luminosity and then A channel and B channel, and we'll learn about that a bit later. So the first thing that we want to work with RGB. We want all red. So these range from 0 to 255. So the most red is 255. If you hit Tab on your keyboard, you'll jump down to green. Just type in 0, hit Tab again, and 0. So red, pure red in this mode is 255, 0, 0. It also shows up as a hex code of this on when you're doing designs online. So that's pure red, and if we say OK, that's going to fill our swatch right here, our foreground color, with pure red. We're going to shift and drag to create a perfect circle. We're going to get 2 color wheels on here, so make your first circle about that big. Because we told it to be a shape and fill with red with no stroke, this is what we see as a result. It made a perfect circle for us. So remember, one of our options is to option drag to make a copy of something. So we want to just switch to our move tool. We're going to hover over this thing that we just made. We're going to hold down Option or Alt on a PC, and we're going to drag to the right a little bit. Went too far, sorry. I'm going to undo that and try again. Drag to the right. Option drag to the right. You guys get to see all of my mistakes. And our goal is to have them overlapping just a little bit. So when we get that one overlapped, we can be happy with where that is. We now want to do that one more time. We're going to option drag, and we're going to take a third version of the circle and we're going to pull it down here so that it overlaps as well. All right, now if we look over at our layers panel, our original ellipse is the one that we wanted to be red, but if we choose the other version, so we're going to come in here and we're going to double click on the middle layer thumbnail. So on the thumbnail itself over here, we're going to double click. And this one we want to be green. So we're going to have 0 red, 255 green, 0 blue. And we're going to say OK. So that's a very bright green color. Then we're going to double click on this other ellipse. And this one we're going to make blue. So 0 for the red coordinate, 0 for green, 255 for the blue. And we're going to say OK. So using the light system, here are 3 colors, RGB, red, green, and blue. All right, so this is going to be our additive colors. We're now going to create the subtractive colors over here. We're going to switch back to our ellipse tool. And we're going to click once in this blank area. That's going to remember our last ellipse that we drew, which was the perfect circle. And we're just going to say OK to that. And it filled with blue. And we want to change this one. So back in our layers panel, we're going to double click on the thumbnail right here to select it and bring up our color picker. Now that we're talking about print, which is subtractive colors, we need to speak in CMYK. So this first one we're going to make be all cyan, and this is a percentage, not a number. So it's 100% cyan. Tab to the magenta and make that 0. 0 yellow, 0 K, which is black or registration. This is what cyan looks like. We are going to switch to our move tool. And we're going to option or alt drag this one. I'm going to drag it down. And I'm going to option drag one more time and get my third copy over here. I'm going to come over to my layer panel and I'm going to double click on this second version. And this one we want to be, we did cyan, CMYK. M is magenta, so we're going to do no cyan. 100% magenta, no yellow, no black. There's our magenta, and then we're going to click on this last one that we made, double click on the thumbnail, and we are going to switch this to be 0 cyan, 0 magenta, 100% yellow, and 0 K. So in our additive system, we have CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and then black, the registration. So right now we have two different color wheels, but in the overlap we're not seeing any different behavior. That's because we're in a normal blend mode if we look over here at our blend mode in Photoshop. So we need to make this change by changing the layer blending mode. So we're going to start with the CMY colors. We're going to select the yellow one, which is the one we're just working on, and we're going to change the blending mode of this layer to be multiply. So from normal, we're going to choose multiply. We're going to do the same for the magenta layer. We're going to choose the magenta layer and tell it to multiply. And then finally, we have the cyan layer, but it's not even necessary to do that because it's the lowest in the layer group, and the blending only affects how layers above it react with those below. So this is the lowest one in the CMYK or the CMY group, so we don't have to change the blend mode here. So now we can see how when cyan's up here, and magenta react on paper, adding to ink, it gets darker and we get this color blue. When magenta and yellow overlap on paper in inks, we get a red. When yellow and blue overlap or interact with inks, we get green. And when they all interact, we get this dirty, muddy black, muddy brown. You can tell it's not a pure black, and that's why that fourth ink of K or registration black is added to that process. Let's go to the other group. So we're going to click on our top version, and we're going to change the blending mode of how this one interacts with the ones below it. Instead of multiplying, we're going to choose screen. And we're going to do the same for this green layer. We're going to change it to screen. So here we can see these are light. Light is shining from behind them. And when blue and red light are added together, it gets brighter, which means lighter, so we get magenta. When red light and green light interact, we get yellow. When green light and blue light interact, we get this light blue, which is cyan. And when all three of these light sources are pointed at one area, it gets brighter and brighter, and we get white. So this is kind of a visual representation of how this works. So why don't these colors match? In other words, if we look at the cyan that's created in this version versus the cyan in print, they're not the same. What's up with that? Well, it has to do with our inks that we actually create and the impurity of our inks. So Photoshop understands that you can't create an ink out of every color that you can see on a screen. It just doesn't work. And so it tries to give us an accurate representation of how cyan would look when it's printed on paper. It's giving us some real world limitations. So if you want to have a little fun with these colors, we can select the topmost layer over here in our layer stack. And then we're going to do an adjustment. So come all the way down here and choose on your adjustments. And we have adjustments called hue and saturation. We'll put these to work in a more logical way soon, but for now, let's play with this. In the properties panel, we see our hue. And that means that as we pull this, we are going to be changing the hues. So look at how our color wheels are changing. Depending on what color of light is shining, we always have that white center. More light is white. Depending on how much ink we're putting down on paper, what different colors it is, as we keep doing that, our center overlap point is always going to be dark. Not true black, unfortunately. That's why we add that black ink. So there are limitations for what we can see on screen as compared to what we can see on print because of inks having limitations. And that's what's called gamut. And luckily, Photoshop gives us some warnings as in, hey, what you're seeing on screen here looks great, but sorry, I can't reproduce it with ink. This is what it's going to look like truly printed with inks. So we're going to learn about that next.